What the Heck's your source for Warhammer Underworlds in under 30 new keywords that we better try to keep track of. I'm your host, Davy, and with me, as always, I got my co-host, Phil. How are you doing, Phil?
Hey, doing great. It's Harrowdeep Day.
Yeah, Harrowdeep Day. That is your context, folks. It is the Harrowdeep pre-order, and that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to do our best to jump straight into it here. We've had about a 36-hour head start on things. We got our preview package from GW, and we say thanks to the folks there for giving us a chance to take a look at that. We're gonna do just our community shout out. We're gonna do to Can You Roll a Crit and Path to Glory, who, as far as I can tell, have done nothing in the past 36 hours but prepare content, because they have a full review of everything in here, and there's a lot.
Yeah,
There's
so
two warbands, universals. There's Grand Alliance cards, and there's a bunch of new rules, and that's what we're going to focus on today. But if you want to be able to take a look at the cards themselves, if you have not already done so, you can go check out those websites, and they break it down card by card for all the stuff that's in there. So do that. And then also we are contractually obligated by ourselves in a blood contract we've written just with ourselves to shout out our personal hero, the crew for underworldsdb.com, who already have the tools out there to get you what you need to build decks.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
In such a short turnaround. It's crazy.
Yeah. MC Rat, I'm convinced he does it only because he time travels as someone over in Australia he's coming to us from the future. So otherwise, how could it be possible? So, but that's what we're going to do for there. We're going to jump straight into the episode here. We're going to be talking the new rules, and there's quite a few of them. We're going to be talking about what we've seen, and what we think some of the impact will be, and it'll be interesting to compare with what the actual impact on the game is, because obviously this is our first take. We haven't even had time to play a game with it yet, much less do that and play a volume with which we'd be able to say here's the definitive impact of that rule. So if we get it wrong, let us know how wrong we are. If we get us right, if we get it right, you can do the same. All right. So I made it my job over the past day to try to go cover to cover through this rule book. And side note, I thought the background stuff at the beginning was outstanding. I thought it was really thematic. I really enjoyed reading it. We talked a little before about the kind of eldritch horror aspect of, kind of unfathomable, fearsome, unknowable horrors, and it's got the real creepy vibe to it. So we'll find some way to cover that soon. It may be also in cooperation with the story phase, like we've done before. We don't know. We haven't seen anything about a accompanying novel / novella / anthology. Fingers crossed for anthology, because that would be fun. That last one was cool. But I think it deserves to be covered, and we'll get to that. But right now, we're gonna look at what kind of impact the changes to the rules have on things here. So, you ready to jump into it?
Hey, let's do it.
Let's do it again. So we're going through these just kind of in the order that we encountered them, right? So, by we, I mean me, because we've got the one set, and I'm looking over and trying to send info over to Phil so he's got an idea. But so the order we'll go through is the order that they're kind of presented. It starts out kind of laying out all the cards, and it's worth mentioning here that the cards themselves are all that new style. And we've seen that new style in the Essentials pack and in the starter set, right?
Yep.
So,
yep.
That now you've had a little bit to get used to them and seen some of the pictures of the new cards. What have you thought about that new style there, Phil?
Yeah. It took a little bit to get used to. It was sort of like, hey, it wasn't broken. Why'd you like rotate everything around and put everything in a new spot? But now that we're seeing some of the further developments of like adding these symbols and things to further codify rules into shorter and more space efficient means, it makes a lot more sense now. The flow
Hmm.
of the cards, I think, is very good, and they will likely continue to be very space efficient, or at the very least, leave a lot more space for more complex rules text. Um, so I think once we're all playing with them for like, I don't know, a couple of games, we'll be completely used to it and we won't think about it anymore.
Yeah, and I'm enjoying the I enjoyed the old style, but I'm enjoying the new style a lot too. So it's kind of cool to get that bigger art's a draw for me. One of the things that they have done is they where they highlight, here's where you see a figure's movement, here's where you see a figure's health, that sort of thing. They talk about the trait, and we've seen this before. We've seen it with leaders, so the crown
Mhm.
symbol that you'll see on a leader card. Wizards, when you see the uh, weird, I don't know, arcane rune that defines a wizard. But they have two new ones, and that's beast and flying. Um, Beast is a concept we're kind of familiar with, and we kind of had in our head anyway, but it had to be written out in full every time. This is a fighter that cannot be given attack action upgrades or balance spell upgrades, whatever those happen to be, and they cannot hold objectives. So we've seen plenty of fighters like that, Squigs, and
Yeah, pretty much all the animals except for Riptooth, I think.
I believe that's true. Yeah. Um, And doing this saves them a lot of card space, and then it also keeps us, because we know Riptooth is out there every time something that kind of codes as a beast, like a crab or something like that. Every time something that comes out, we got to take a look at that and say, okay, let me make sure that the text all reads, that there isn't something left off. Well, here you can just put this symbol. It looks kind of like a clawed symbol, actually, kind of like I think a monster symbol from a little bit like the monster symbol from Age of Sigmar, maybe, or Rampage. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's Warcry symbols, almost
Oh, yep,
exactly. I think they just
sure,
pulled them directly and slapped them on here.
yep. Um, and then flying. So flying is when making a move action. This fighter cannot be dealt damage by lethal hexes and can move through blocked and occupied hexes. Must end their move action in an empty hex. And that just kind of lays that out. What's fun about that is that we've seen some of this effect before, like um, from a while back. Like, were you saying there was something in Shadespire? There was
There were some
something.
upgrades back in
That's right.
Shadespire, I
That's right.
think, that let people basically do this where they could just run through stuff and then they had to end their move in an open hex
Sure.
because I like it just there's no other way to do it. And you'd always have to have these big long paragraphs of text explaining this exact concept over and over and
Hmm.
over. So it's
Hmm.
nice to have it as a nice short thing that people will be able to just be like, oh, there's that symbol. That means I can move through things.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. So if you got the bats or a star eagle, you can just say, "Hey, this thing's flying," and then save the space for something more interesting if you want it. So,
Yeah.
um, there are also on these cards there is a Grand Alliance symbol, which they point out. It's one of four possible symbols, and this becomes relevant in deck building because your Grand Alliance determines a few more universals that you have access to, specific to your Grand Alliance. Now, the warbands we've seen so far that have them are, of course, the two that came with Harrowdeep, and actually the two in the starter set both have those. The Wraith Creepers and the Storm of Celestis have a small um, Grand Alliance symbol on them. Then there's a specific call out here that says, hey, if you have a warband and you're looking at the cards and it does not have a Grand Alliance symbol, go to warhammerunderworlds.com and you will find them there. And at the time of recording, that list isn't up there. Those of us who know the game pretty well or know the background pretty well could, you know, pretty easily infer which Grand Alliance things are assigned to. Um, if you're ever not sure, I believe Path to Glory on there, they kind of have it laid out as well. But
Yeah.
this is an example of them kind of bringing. bringing the game up to speed with the older warbands. So not exactly an errata, but kind of. And it makes me wonder whether we might see that happen with any other keywords. I don't know what you think the chances of that are.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like they have been pretty resistant to updating old warbands. And obviously, like, there's probably sales and marketing reasons for pushing the new stuff over the old stuff. But um, I don't know, with Rivals, it kind of makes sense that you might
Mhm.
continue to see um, updates to some old stuff just to make sure that it's like, hey, it's very clear that, the Corn warband is a Chaos warband. It's not like a separate thing. So, um, I'd be cool. I'd be super cool with them doing more updates to old stuff because I love some of the old Shadespire warbands. But
Mm.
if they don't, I guess that's status quo, and I wouldn't be upset about that either.
Yeah, there's some cards that I'm expecting you'll see will interact with beasts or whatever, and it'll feel weird that if there's things that are clearly beasts out there but don't gain the benefit of that. So you wonder, will they mark beasts as beasts, and if they do that, how far will they go? Will
Hmm.
they decide to add hunter into something, or will they, um, what all are they gonna give different keywords to? I guess how far do they want to go with it?
Yeah.
That remains to be seen. But speaking of building decks with Grand Alliance cards, there is a section about building decks, and there is just a few things of note here. One was that it talks about building your objective deck, saying you must have a minimum of 12 objectives in it, which is different than exactly 12 objectives in it.
Hmm.
So uh, that's a change. I don't know. Do you think that's an impactful change, or is it just kind of a
I mean, maybe in a negative way for someone who's not quite like sure of what they're doing. Like if you roll up with 20 objective cards or something, you're probably doing yourself a disservice. But
yeah?
yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. It opens up more design space. Um, like there could be future reasons for wanting or needing to take more than 12, which I think is potentially interesting. Whether it'll be good or not, we'll have to wait and see. I think since they are still restricted to 6 surge cards in championship format, that is a reason not to want to start adding a whole bunch more end phase stuff because it just
Mm,
increases the chance of getting hands of end phase cards, which you probably don't really want.
sure. Like I've definitely have you score out a Starblood Stalkers deck on me by the end of round two. And you would think, well, gosh, it'd be nice to have a few more objectives to score in round three, but you're probably not getting through your whole deck by the end of round two if you've diluted your surges. So
Yeah.
uh, if there's, yeah, it'd be interesting if there's more ways to like manage your objective hand. If there's, there are some of these universals do have some interaction with how you draw, and we'll see something with at the start of the game how mulligans work. It'd be interesting to see how much that feeds into this, but we may touch on those more when we get there.
Yeah.
Power cards are the same, so minimum of 20, and no more than half can be gambits. So you're in the same boat. You can do 10 and 10 is the thing you're going to most often see, with an occasional 10-11 or 11-11 or something else. So
Yeah. And
uh,
that's not, I mean, I think that's good that they kept that the same.
mhm. So then the next thing they do is they kind of lay out a board, and they do a good job of explaining here's what friendly territory is, and here's what no one's territory is. They had a cool point about edge hexes, which was if you're if a hex you're looking at, if it doesn't have 6 complete hexes around it, then it is an edge hex. It's like, oh, that's a pretty easy test for people who might be confused about it. Just look at it, and if you can't count 6 complete around it, there you go. There's your answer. So,
Hmm. Yeah. Nice, quick
um,
explanation.
yeah. There is a new thematic hex, which is a cover hex. This is signified by a dashed line on the board. Um, that is new to this. It goes alongside blocked and lethal hexes as a hex type that you could encounter on the board. Um, Cover hexes provide double supports for defense. What do you think about that mechanic?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. More defensive play opportunities, for better or worse, is something that I think is interesting. But I mean, the general community will have to decide whether more defensive play is good. Um, but like, you can make a fighter really hard to hit if they're
Mm,
counting double supports all the time as defense successes. And I don't know. It'll be interesting. I mean, I like the idea of sitting autopodal and some cover hexes and being like, "Yep,
yeah,
free dodge with double supports. Sounds good to me."
sure.
Um,
Or Glissette sashaying her way over to a cover hex.
give her a single support, and then she's succeeding on all sides of the dice.
Gross.
Yeah, it'd be good. Um, yeah. So I mean, I don't know. It'll certainly be a change from lethal hexes. That's for sure. Uh,
Mhm.
how it impacts the game, though, I think we're really going to have to play with it first to see what the true impact is.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's worth noting is that as a defensive buff, it is not a symbol that's going to get negated by cleaver and snare. So
Yeah.
with those keywords floating around, if you're there, that double support all of a sudden is really your friend because it's a defense result that will not get canceled by those rules. So it's
Hmm.
perhaps more powerful for having been that way.
Right.
Um, Well, let's talking about boards. They also go into board placement. So there's a 4 hex overlap. It used to be in the championship play rules. Now it's in the official rules. So whatever format you're playing, there is now the 4 hex overlap. Thinking about it, I don't know that I ever saw somebody in Vanguard. I don't know. Not that I played Vanguard, but I think it was just kind of treated as a rule already. So we've seen it
Right.
before. It's in there. Do you think it's been a generally positive or generally negative or generally neutral change to the game? How do you feel about it being codified?
Yeah, I think it's overall a positive change. I think people more often than not are going to enjoy having more interaction, and
Mm-hmm.
this change forces that more frequently.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know that it's necessary for that to be part of the game, but I think because there is an emphasis on combat, and wanting people to be able to fight, and trying to make it so that you can't just completely block out a aggro warband with board placement, that I think generally it's overall a positive.
Yeah, I think so. I think especially with the extra defense from cover, you'd hate to make it hard to get to people, and also once you get there, they're even harder to hit. So I
Yeah.
think that's solid. I feel like last season I saw more hallway, more long configuration
Yeah,
since
right.
the diagonal. So I wonder how prevalent that'll be. That configuration has its own quirks, where it's you can get some distance, but it's hard to move past people. So um,
Very true.
interesting to see. There's less variation in there. There's some more quirks with the diagonals where you can kind of with certainly where certain block hexes are, you can really kind of choke off the map even more so than you'd expect. So
Hmm.
there's a little side about rerolls. This is pretty minor, pretty corner case, so we won't spend a ton of time on it. But it talks specifically about the timing rerolls, and as with most any GW game, a dice can't be rerolled more than once, even if you have more than one reroll rule available to you. It does say rerolls should be done simultaneously unless they're coming from different sources. So, if, for instance, I had, let's say, Eagle Eye, and I was making ranged attack, so I've got one reroll from that, and then my target is staggered, which is a new rule for this, where you'll have a reroll against that target. You have two rerolls, but they're coming from different sources, and so I can reroll. I can pick up one dice, reroll it, see what that is, and then pick up a different dice and reroll that. Again, incredibly corner case. The only thing I could come up with off the top of my head that seemed like might be a scenario where you'd want to do that is with branching fate, or maybe with a caster where you really didn't want to accidentally get yourself into a backlash situation.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, pretty minor stuff there, but it's Someone will be creative and find a good reason for wanting to roll things one at a time like that.
Yeah, and it's just good to know exactly. Sometimes these things, it's nice to know exactly what the timing is supposed to be. So
Right.
it's nice that it's laid out. That's a small one. Let's hit a big one here: objective tokens, feature
Yeah.
tokens, I should perhaps say. Um, in the last two seasons, the back of our feature tokens were lethals, no longer. So the back of the tokens are gloom, which is not synonymous with cover. Um, they do happen to be cover hexes. So like all gloom hexes are cover hexes, but the reverse is not true. All cover
Hmm.
hexes are not gloom, and that's going to be important in a some cards may refer to cover hexes and some may refer to gloom hexes. So make sure you're drawing a distinction between the two.
Yep.
Um, First up is that they start gloom side up. So once they're all placed, that gloom side will be the sides that's showing you don't flip them over. And so uh, that's worth, I guess it's worth saying how we flip them because that's pretty significant here. That is a mechanic called delve, and that is a thing you can do in your power step in place of playing a card. So if I said, okay, for power step, I'm gonna sidestep. I'll move. All right, Phil, your turn. You can neither then on your turn play a card or you can flip a feature token, and that would have to be a feature token that you have a friendly fighter standing on.
Hmm.
So you're only flipping the ones that you're already standing on. So you're kind of committed to that. Um, and then you can only flip a feature token. You can only delve a feature token once per player. So there's a circumstance where if you were to delve, flip one over, and then I somehow during the power step got onto that same objective, I could delve it back the other direction.
Yeah.
Um,
Like a confusion play onto it and then flip it back over or
exactly.
something.
That seems like the most likely. I think maybe living land where you might drag it
Yep.
in a direction or something like that. Relatively limited times, but it's not that it'll happen. It'll happen here and there.
Yeah.
This is a big one, right? What do you think the impact of this is?
Yeah. I mean, so I think there's a few other things that go into this as well, but I think overall it's a big change. Um, Even just knowing that all of the hexes have to start face down, like that just by itself means that in turn one, first activation, you cannot score a surge for holding objectives. Just
Mm,
flat. It's just not possible. Um, because you won't be able to end your activation on a objective. It'll be flipped over. So you'd have to wait
right.
until
It'll take
after
until the
power step.
power step. So the things that come to mind here are, uh, anyone who's been playing this for a while immediately thinks of hidden purpose and temporary victory. But wait, you say those are not in the game anymore. Uh, there are still ones out there, and I think the most obvious that jumps out is in the name of the king, Grimwatch,
Yeah.
um, notorious there. But there's some other ones, right? Like Lady Harrow's Mournflight. Uh, they have beholding an even and odd. They have moved through two objective tokens in a single
Hmm.
move. Those are more difficult to set up all of a sudden. So
A lot more
uh,
difficult. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Not impossible, but it just it slows it. And what I like about this is that there's a good episode that our friend Matt recommended about the right to respond. It was an
Hmm.
episode of Can You Roll a Crit, and really excellent about the idea of like you do a thing, I should have a chance to counter that. And this creates that for hold objective surges, right?
Right.
Um, so you move on, you delve the things that you're going to want to do something about. Now I have the opportunity in the existing power step there slash if I'm going next my activation to try to do something about that. So um, I think I like it. It's just a question of with enough stuff rotated out, is it even necessary? But it's at the very least different. Um,
Hmm.
Here's you referenced some other things that were significant for this, and I'm gonna list these other couple of things out, and then we'll dive back into this the further implications. Uh, for one, when we're placing tokens in the past, we would just take turns pulling them off the stack blind and placing them. Um, Now, if you have the first board, so Phil, you place the first board, you're going to have three feature tokens to place. I'm going to deal you three, deal myself two. We can each look at the ones we have. So I'm going to know in my two, do I have 2 and 4? Do I have 1 and 5? What do I have? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and then I can make an informed decision about that. The flip is that until yours are delved, I do not know what order they are. I know what three they could be, but I don't know where they're at.
Yep.
And that adds kind of a cool layer of like lies and mystery, which is relevant to this sphere that we're in Ulgu. Um, and then before we get into that, the last piece of this is that the rules tell you to. They have all the same requirements. You can't place a feature token on a starting hex. You can't place a feature token on a lethal hex or a blocked hex. Can't place it on an edge hex. And it says if you ever can't follow all those rules, the rule you can break is that you're allowed to place it on an edge hex. What it does not say is that anything about the last objective placed. There's no caveat for that. So that last
Mm-hmm.
objective placed uh, still has to follow all the rules if you still can. Uh, so you could get forced, depending on how things landed, into a placement that's like really up front and center.
Yeah.
So we got a couple conflicting things going on here, where you can't just set aside some territory at the back to say I'm gonna that spot way back in the corner, that's gonna be my dropping spot for an objective. Um, and but also there's some more cat and mouse as far as the numbers. So what's your take on what impacts those might have?
So I really like the numbers change. We were talking before about how the whole objectives that required you to know which numbers you were going to
Mm-hmm.
land on, it just always felt so bad because you might just end up flipping all the wrong numbers or having the numbers that you want but have them really close to the front lines. And there's just like holding objectives was already kind of the more difficult thing to do in the game anyway, so it was like it
Mm-hmm.
always just felt like this double bad. Like, why would I want to do this? It's never going to be easy enough to score to make it worthwhile. And so now that you have some control, I think there's the potential, especially for certain cards, to start seeing some play again. And then on the flip side, your opponent then has more chance for counterplay with the numbers as well, because they can know that, like, hey, I know they're probably going to want this one. I'll make that the one I put as far away from them as possible.
Sure. And an extra advantage to having three is that you have more knowledge at the start of the game over which numbers are which. So
Yeah, definitely.
that can
Um,
come in handy. And
yeah.
not just on objectives. There's a few things like we talked about, like living land, which can move an objective that corresponds to the turn number, or flip it,
So
I
yeah,
suppose.
it flips
Yeah,
it, which,
yeah.
I mean, that ends up being an interesting defensive play now, because like if you know you don't have it, that makes your living
Hmm.
land pretty nice if you know you're playing into an objective holding warband, because you're like, oh cool,
Hmm.
when they need that. Yeah, because it lets you move one in your territory or flip one that matches the number. So as long as
Sure.
you know you don't have it, you know you've got an extra flip that you can use from anywhere on the board
Yeah.
as a defensive play, and that could be
Yeah, it'll create
potentially
some cat and mouse
impactful.
with the delve. Like
Yeah.
they're going to if they figure out that you've got that, they're going to delve earlier, sooner rather than later,
Yep.
so that they'll be able to get it back over. But
Yeah. It's interesting though.
sure. What
In
about this
turn,
token placement?
yeah. This is another thing where like objective placement is hard to conceptualize just in your head. It's something that's much easier to like really grasp when you can look at it and figure out all the different potential placements. Um, there's been a number of articles now, but like until someone had done an article to sort of lay out like, well, here's, objective placement as a strategy, and like here's where if you place your first one here, it means these are all the places that are still open to you and all the different possibilities. And it's like it sort of flips this switch of like, oh, that's right, there's this whole strategy of how you're placing the tokens. And I
Hmm.
think that upends a lot of these strategies, because usually when you care about these things, you want three. And part of the plan is that you always had that option to keep one farther away.
Hmm.
That option's now gone. So you're probably going to have to think more about like, how many neutrally placed ones can I have?
Yeah,
Because they're all going to have to be closer together. So you want to be able to make sure your first placed hex allows for the most neutral placements possible, so that you
sure.
still have three in your territory like you want, but they're not all just clumped right up at the front lines.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. There's a challenge there because I think you should be able to get yourself one that is fairly relatively safely placed. But more than one is going to be really difficult to do because there's going to
Yep.
be a lot of placements that can counter that. So I think this is a realm where like a little practice, like laying out a board and saying, okay, like if
Hmm.
I put here, where would somebody else put? I think this is where some prep can pay off for people. Um,
Yeah.
I think there's also an interesting push pull here with, hey, I've got, we talked about like delving at the right time, right? Like you don't want to leave
Hmm.
it too late because if somebody does pack a little bit of flip tech, then they can burn you for the end phase. But
Yeah.
the longer you wait to delve, the longer your fighter is protected because they are on a gloom hex, which is a cover hex. Um,
Very true.
so, and a lot of those fighters could use a little bit of extra protection. So, um,
It's a
that
lot of risk
again, like
reward.
anytime we're giving more sort of decision points, is got potential for up in some skill, I guess. So,
Yeah.
I think I tentatively like all these changes. I certainly, if maybe too early to say like, I think I'm very interested to see how they play out. I think it's a nice shakeup
Yeah.
on this.
I think
Uh,
that's a good take. As
yeah,
someone who likes to play hold objectives, I'm very apprehensive about all the flipping that's going to be possible.
yeah,
But I think it'll just necessitate a strategy change. Um, Obviously, Surge. Not that there's a lot left, but Surge hold objectives is just not as viable of a strategy anymore.
mm,
Um, and things that allow you to score for holding like just a certain amount of hexes or for holding all of the objectives is probably a lot easier now, because now like they all start flipped. So if you just hold one that you've
mm.
chosen to delve in the last power step, you could be getting something like claim the city for holding one.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
be pretty
interesting
nuts.
infestation. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how viable those cards are because that with delving, it means a lot of flip gambits or upgrades have lost some of their currency because it's relatively easy to do. But I think if you get the timing right, there's some potential to be unlocked there.
Yeah.
Um, Here's one aspect we haven't even mentioned. Now that the backside are gloom tokens and the additional two that get placed, so you would each get one to put down, are also gloom tokens. There's a whole lot less lethal hex floating around out there now.
Yeah.
Uh, and that has, so we just talked about some of the like push pull pros cons for objective holding. This is a push pull pro con for aggro. So con, it's harder to get to that one shot, and by one shot, sometimes I'm meaning like doing 3 damage plus a lethal to finish them off,
Yeah.
um, to get to 4. Um, but on the other hand, if somebody diagonal offsets you, they can't throw an extra lethal in there to make it even worse for you to get in. Like the
Yeah.
way is now further open than it ever was before. Um, the number of times that you were just like running a gauntlet of lethal hexes and going like, oh man, I sure hope I sure hope I don't get knocked back or pushed or
Yeah.
whatever. So um, that'll be interesting to see. Like damage basically has kind of, just by virtue of lethals, they're not gone. They still exist on boards. But
Yeah. There's a lot less of them though. You
yeah,
can very easily choose for there to not be any on your side of the board.
sure.
I
Yeah,
th-
you can place fighters more aggressively because during setup, a lot of times that if you were an aggro player, that frontmost spot would get a lethal hex set right behind it to dare
yep,
you to set up there. No
sure
longer.
would.
So,
That play is dead, which is
yeah.
kind of nice. Um, yeah, I think overall lowering the lethality of the game, but mm, sort of promoting aggro is actually kind of an interesting balance. I think
Hmm.
maybe one of the things that I always disliked about the aggro metas is that it really became just a one shot kill um, meta. It was like,
Sure.
can you get the kills in one hit? And so every
Hmm.
attack was life or death. There was never a chance to, well, very rarely was there a chance to survive an attack.
Hmm.
And it just starts to feel like, well, as soon as you get your dice going hot, the game's over.
Hmm.
If the amount of damage really isn't there though, now all of a sudden 4 wound fighters could actually have a chance to maybe take advantage of mechanics like heal, or
Yeah.
having a better reason for wanting to be on guard because you know that you're having a chance to survive more than one hit. So
Yeah.
that
It'll
could
be
be pretty
interesting.
cool.
Sure, to see how we evaluate cards like that heal. Like generally speaking, we see a card that's heal one, we're like, I don't. That's not anything. That's not going to be all that great. But maybe they are. Maybe they're better now, and we'll see how that plays out. I
Yeah.
know a big thing where there's a lot of Dire Chasm warbands on paper were a little light on damage. Like they started at twos across the board. Three felt like a pretty rare damage profile
Right.
for fighters. And I think some of that was probably masked by the presence of lethals. And if they're not around, maybe that becomes more apparent. So,
For sure.
um, yeah, so big changes there, and big changes that kind
Huge.
of push things in different directions at the same time. So, here's another big change, real big one, and this is another one that was real easy to have glossed over. I actually had to go back and read it again. My first time through, I missed this, and uh, just because I was kind of looking for like, let me find. First time through was like, let me focus on like the keywords that are new to me.
Hmm.
I already know how to draw cards. What could they possibly tell me about drawing cards? But what they can tell you is that the mulligan rule now. So it gives you the order of, so draw your cards and then choose, are you going to keep or discard, keep or mulligan your power cards or your objective cards or both. The player that first place the first board is the first one to make this decision. You set those cards down, you draw your new hand, and then you take those discarded cards and you shuffle them back in. So,
Oh man.
uh, yeah. So you will not, whatever you mulligan, you are not going to see in your opening hand. Like it's the shuffle happens after you draw your new hand.
Yeah.
Um, but that's big, right? And
Oh, it's huge.
yeah, uh, and we talked. I mean, honestly, like this is one of the parts of the game I was worst at. Is I've always felt so bad to mulligan. I would hang on to hands that I probably shouldn't have,
Hmm.
just because it felt so lethal. Like decks would get so fine tuned that you'd say, I can't afford to discard this 5 glory. Like
Yeah.
if I discard this 5 glory, I've probably lost anyway. So I need to find a way to make this work. That was maybe overstating just how dire it was, but that's how it could feel at times.
I
Um,
mean, I don't know how hyperbolic that is. There were some points in the meta, especially with the end of Beastgrave with whole objective surges, where it was like, no, really, your opponent, if they aren't mulliganing, is going to score every single card in their deck. And
mm,
if you just threw away 3 cards, you've pretty much guaranteed a loss. Even if you score everything in your deck, you only scored 9, whereas they scored 12. So unless you were
right.
scoring a bunch of like 2 and 3 scores and they were scoring all ones, the
Hmm.
math just ends up meaning that on equal play on the board, because you threw away cards, you don't have enough glory to catch them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think this is a great change. I think this will allow for a lot more variety in deck building.
Hmm.
Um, there's always the concerns of bricking hands, of saying like, well, but what if you draw all those in your first hand? Then what are you going to do? And it's like, well, I now have an answer to that question, and the answer is I'm just going to put them away and draw them later in the game. Um, I mean, this is another one I think we need to play with, but it feels like it's going to have major ramifications from the ground up.
Hmm.
Like people are just going to
Yeah.
build decks differently.
Yeah. You can be more aggressive. It makes third end phase objectives a little more palatable. Because
Yeah,
if you draw those in that opening hand, you don't have to carry them the whole way. You get to shuffle them back in.
definitely.
Uh,
I still don't think you take more
and-
than one.
no, I agree. But even one felt like sometimes more
Yeah,
than I wanted.
still, yeah.
Um,
Yep.
so I would I will revisit a lot of the third end phase ones now. But even stuff like Pure Carnage, which is not technically a third end phase.
Yeah, you still don't want it in your first opening hand. Like,
Exactly. So, um, yeah, basically Reaver's OP. So there.
oh yeah, definitely. Yep. Calling it now.
Yeah. Yeah. This is far ranging. I think you said it. You said it best already. So, excited to see how this goes, and excited to play some games with this mechanic. See
Ooh,
how that
yes.
feels. Um, Relatively minor. There's a break mechanic, and I think this is again mostly a word saving thing, which is basically an upgrade can be broken, which is
Hmm.
just that it's discarded. So this is kind of like what acidic strike would do. Acidic strike
Yep.
basically breaks an upgrade.
Yep. And
So there's a number of ways
was
to
it
it.
narrowing passage or whatever it was
Yep.
called? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it just helps to kind of differentiate between discard, which is a different thing, and break. So
Yeah.
um,
And it's
just
something we'll talk about in a future episode more, but it pairs well with the new illusion mechanic. It
mm,
allows them to make
yep.
a clear distinction of these break after a certain thing happens, and then you don't have to
Hmm.
have the huge wall of text explaining what all things break it, and then another paragraph of text explaining what that means to break it.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so, yep, definitely saves some space.
A couple other rapid fire keywords worth mentioning. There's vulnerable, which is a keyword that doesn't do anything on its own. It just means that one more damage and you're dead.
Yep.
Um, and there's already a number of universals or different cards that interact with that vulnerable state. Um, there's bounty, which is just a term given for the glory that you earn from taking a fighter out. So
Yeah.
um, so things like if we were to get a return of something like Tome of Offerings, it would say, uh, fighters that you take out of action are worth one additional glory for their bounty or something like that. Like it would just um, help clarify that. So you'll see
Yeah.
things that interact with that without having to spell it out. Grievous, which we've seen, is +1 damage on a crit. So pretty straightforward. Um, they did a lot of work with cleaning up the power with the I should say they did a lot of work with cleaning up the reactions. So there
Mm-hmm.
is a reaction slash inspire a reaction step, inspire step, surge that happens after each activation step and power step. So now your turn is split into an activation step, power step, and each of those are followed by a reaction, inspire, surge. So any reactions to that, any things that could inspire, and any surges that would score off of that. And they have a little lightning bolt to say, hey, here's a point where you'd be able to play reaction. And they do that all the way through the attack sequence, which is handy. So it says, hey, after this thing happens, there's a chance for reactions. After this thing happens, there's a chance for reactions.
Yeah.
Um,
So I guess I'm still not 100% clear, not having actually seen the rule book. I've seen some of this text written out for in our notes.
mm-hmm.
So there's a specific step now in where surges are scored.
It is the same as was kind of laid out in Beastgrave. It's just more formally written, where after after an activation, we said the order that things happened were reactions, inspiration, surges. Um,
Sure. Okay. Okay. Sure.
so
Got it.
it's kind of formalizing that. One interesting side effect of this is that there is no surge step in the end phase. These only happen after an activation and after a power step, which
Hmm.
means that, and they say this explicitly, that surges cannot be scored in the end phase. That was relatively rare, but it was powerful, but also like confusing when it would happen. So
Yeah. When you like draw up your new hand and then immediately score something, like that would always feel
yeah,
weird.
yeah. And I think there were a couple primacy ones that were like, if you discard primacy
Yeah.
and you're on certain objectives, then and you're like, well, I score that in the end. Well, not anymore. So
Yep.
um, that's good. That was just kind of a weird corner case thing that was always funky to deal with. So so we talked about the attack sequence. There's some specific language here, and this was worth noting. I think it kind of clears up. There's been one conflict about whether fighters that don't drive back but push instead, like Hadzu or Tamael, um, whether they can whether a fighter can ever be considered trapped. And with the previous wording, since those fighters weren't driving back, there was an argument made that they couldn't trap a fighter. Now,
Hmm.
trapped is defined. The target is trapped if there is no empty hex adjacent to the target, which is further from the attacker.
Yeah.
There's no reference to whether you have to drive back or not. You're immune to being trapped if you are immune to drive back or pushes. So uh, those
Sure.
fighters, Hadzu's not going to be able to trap a fighter who's on guard, for instance, but we'll still
Right.
be able to push him. So I think that the language got cleaned up in there in a good way, and I think it's pretty clear that in those two fighters' cases that they do gain the benefits of having a fighter trapped, which that's cool.
Yeah. Definitely.
Nothing too far-reaching there, since I can only think of two fighters that it applies to. But uh,
Sure.
let's see. Line of sight is in there. There's no changes. It's just worth mentioning because people get confused a lot. Line of sight, if it touches a blocked hex, so if you run down the side of a blocked hex with your line of sight, you don't have line of sight. If you run down the side of an incomplete hex, you still have line of sight. So
Yep.
you incomplete hex is only block if your line of sight goes into that incomplete hex, not alongside it. So worth taking note.
Correct. Yep.
Um, while we're talking about attacks, there is a new mechanic called stagger. Uh,
Mm.
Stagger, if you stagger somebody, which is I think most often with an attack, will have the keyword stagger, but also there are power cards that will say stagger this enemy fighter. If you stagger a fighter, you will remove their guard tokens, and then they have a stagger token on them, and then anyone attacking that fighter can reroll one dice.
Hmm.
So those combination of things are pretty good. Notable here, it just removes guard tokens. So if you have something that keeps you always on guard, then that does not apply. I feel like we're getting fewer and fewer of those, though. Like survival instincts is now rotated out.
Right.
We'll still see dominant defender, which I think counts you on guard while you're on an objective. I believe the Mad Mob have some for if they have primacy, then they're on guard, that sort of thing. But um, I think it would be good if they move towards like you have to have a guard token to be on guard, sort of thing. Like have some way of generating a guard token. So
Except for Glissette, but you
yeah, yeah. Glisset
know.
forever. Um, that's a good point. Glisset
Yeah.
is always on guard. Um, point being, you can stagger Glisset. She'll still be on guard. You'll get a reroll against her, so she'll be in some
Still,
kind of
still something.
in between. Yeah. Um, I think this is fine.
Yeah.
I
I
think it's what do you?
Rerolls are a big deal.
Yeah,
Doesn't always feel like it, but I
yeah.
think more often than not, the chance of succeeding in an attack with a reroll is so great compared to
Hmm.
one without. Having passive ways to just get rerolls without cards is probably really good. Um,
Sure.
I mean, there's some setup involved, but same with most everything else in this game. So I think
Yeah.
there
I mean,
will
if,
be plenty of uses for this.
yeah. Uh, I think if you're Ripa, you really like staggering people because all of a sudden your
Oh
wolf
yeah.
bites are rerolling and that sort of thing. So that's anytime if you have an attack action that um, cannot be modified, rerolls will you'll enjoy staggering instead. You
Hmm.
can remove your stagger token if you take a guard action. Then you give yourself a guard token and remove a stagger token. And it's not just a guard action. You can say, I'm if you give your if that fighter which is staggered is given a guard token by whatever mechanic, whether it be an action or a
Hmm.
gambit or something else, then you will remove stagger tokens. So this is kind of like a it's almost like its own delve, like where you're flipping back and forth between.
Yeah. I can definitely see some fun back and forth there, but I think there's also going to be situations where you've made a charge and then your opponent uses a ploy to stagger your fighter, and it's like, well, you've charged, so you can't take another action. So
Mm-hmm.
now I just get rerolls on you for the rest of the round.
Yep. Yep. Um, Mentioning delve, that kind of brings us back around to the power step. Here's a big change with the power step. After I take an activation, if I'm playing against you, Phil, you have the first chance to play a power card. Power step starts with the opponent. Um, so
Yeah.
that I think that's got impacts that there's something. So like it takes I think it gives a little more into that right to respond, right? Like
Hmm.
that's what I see from it. Where before you'd say, I'm going to attack, and then immediately I'm going to get to play a power card as well. Um, so maybe you're Grimwatch, you're attacking and then using seized weapon, or like moving and using seized
Yeah.
weapon, or I attack and do a certain amount of damage, and then I also push, use a distraction to throw you into a lethal or something like that. Now you have a chance to say like, okay, uh, I just got attacked. Uh, let's say Vortimus got knocked back. He's got 1 health left, and they specifically push me next to this lethal. I have an opportunity to do something before I go. Do I want to burn my sidestep, stepping back on the chance that they have, I guess, not distraction anymore, but hypnotic buzz or whatever the case may be.
Hmm.
Um,
Should be a good change overall. It's another one of those play pattern change ups where like it will require a shift in mindset.
mhm,
So it's very difficult to imagine what the implications will be just from thinking about it. But once we get into
mhm,
playing with it, I think we'll start to see some major benefits of being able to do it. Um, there'll probably be a whole bunch of interesting power cards that you can play to really mess up your opponent's plans, because you got to do that before they got to really start laying out their power step plan.
mhm. Uh, Speaking of laying out a power step plan, that is a thing that we didn't talk about with Delve. That is effectively it's a I'm going to tread water for a second. So
Hmm.
I'm going to say, maybe I'm Reavers and I really don't actually care about objectives. But if I have someone on it, I can say, I'm going to delve. I'm going to give up my chance at cover, or conversely, I've somehow gotten onto an objective that's exposed. I'm going to give myself cover, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to wait to see if you have anything to play. So
Yeah.
I don't know that there's a ton of circumstance, but you occasionally get in those like kind of staring matches of like, okay, go ahead. Are you going to play something? You passed. I'm happy with the board state. I'll pass as well. Then and we'll lock it
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. Gives you a way to stall without passing,
Yep.
which is it's definitely nice. Does
Yeah.
require positioning, so certain warbands won't even want to risk taking the action to be on a token. But if you get there anyway, just because you need to have moved into that particular spot,
Hmm.
I like the flexibility that it offers there.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be interesting to see how often that stall is actually a significant thing. There's one other thing. This is a pretty corner case thing. I actually did have it come up in one of my games, but uh, like it would have changed some of the way some of these games might have played. But reaction windows remain where priority. So uh, if both players, there's only one reaction per window allowed.
Mhm.
And if both players want to react, it's the person who's got the next activation. If there is no next activation because it's about to be the end of the game or the end of the round and we don't know who's going next, then it'd be, let's just pretend that there would be somebody taking the next one, and it would be the normal iteration.
Mhm.
There was a weird circumstance where so let's say I took an activation, you have priority, so you react to that. If we both want to react to your reaction, you technically still have priority under the old rules because you have the next activation. So you could chain a bunch of reactions together. It was pretty rare, but you could potentially react to my activation, then react to your reaction, then react to your reaction, just perpetually blocking me out until you're out of cards. Again, pretty rare, but it occasionally could happen. I would see it happen with a lot of times if you had the ability to react with an attack. So it kind of, and then, so like Furious Reprisal or something like that, where
Right.
if you attacked me with your activation and I used a Ripa's card, Furious Reprisal, attacked back, and then had something like I was using Wolf Bite and like, whoops, I missed with that. Let me try again with, Unbridled Ferocity, preventing you from occupying that window. So, it's going to be rare that it comes up, but I think it's a good one. It keeps one player from being able to just kind of dominate. It still keeps us in that right to respond territory there. So
Yeah, definitely.
I think we've kind of covered the changes that that I managed to dig out of this book and mark up. So
Yeah, just a couple things.
I know, right? There's kind of covered a lot of ground there as far as what it was. How do you feel about this relative to other seasons? Like, is this, the one of the things that we didn't really mention, like we talked about like illusions. They're kind of a relatively small thing. We didn't see a big thing. We didn't see a big thing like magic or hunger or primacy, right?
Yeah. Now, of course, we'll talk about this a bit more in our Warband reviews, but on the new Warband cards, there are some other new keywords that'll likely be important going forward. So just some things to keep in mind there.
Sure. I mean,
It's
we can
like,
mention those like
yeah,
what assassin
it's
and
Assassin, Brawler, and Companion.
right.
Assassin and Brawler are like Hunter and Quarry. They don't
Mm-hmm.
actually, as far as I can tell, they don't do anything on their own. You will need another card to trigger something for a fighter that is one of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And then Companion, we've only seen it on one fighter so far, and I think it will also require other cards to unlock anything for it.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
we have seen reference to Hunter. There's a universal that references hunters as well. So
Okay.
obviously not a new one, but a continuing thing. There were no cards that referenced. I did not see anything that referenced quarry, and I didn't see anything that referenced primacy or hunger. So that's
Mm,
not a guarantee that we won't see them later. But
yeah. No reference to primacy. Missed opportunity there.
well, hopefully by the time we are done with this recording, they'll really stick it to us and release something like an
Well,
accompanying document.
I
At
would
the least,
not
I would expect to see it on release day. But
be upset with an FAQ right now, but
sure, yeah.
if they want to continue to just not answer the questions about primacy, I guess that's their prerogative. And since it's not in the new rule book, they could just let it die. But it seems weird that they would do that when there's a warband that requires it.
And they could, well, and that warband comes with a primacy card in it, so
Yep.
yeah. But taken as a whole, so we talked about those things that there wasn't any like single big like mechanic like, oh, here's the like, guess what, now there's magic in Underworlds. Guess what, now there's hunters and quarries or whatever. There's a
Yeah.
little bit of that going on, but really what we're seeing is like an amalgamation of a lot of small to moderate changes. Some are, maybe bigger than they first appear. What's your overall feel? How does it feel to you? Does it feel like too much, not enough?
I think it'll be hard to say if it's too much. My initial reaction right now is it's like this is almost like a version change for the game. We're
Mm,
taking a lot of core concepts and changing them. We're
mm,
changing how objective hexes are placed. We're codifying the new board placement. We're changing deck construction. We're uh, you know, like objective tokens are changing again. Now, not that that's completely new, but it is something we're seeing again. Mulligans are changed. The the just the layout of the turn is not even the same as it used to be. So
mm,
these changes, well, individually are all kind of small. If you take them all together, it's like people who are familiar with the game are probably going to need to sort of hit the reset button and be like, nope, it's different now. The game has changed. And for people who are starting over, it'll probably, or not starting over, but are starting new, it'll probably be helpful because a lot of this stuff is going to help smooth out some gameplay stuff.
sure. Yeah. I would agree with that that feeling of like almost an edition change. It's not, you think of some of the times where the flagship games like 40K or AOS or back in its day Fantasy, some of those edition changes were like, whoa, this is like almost a completely different game. Some of them were like, yeah, this is I recognize all the bones of this, but there has been these tweaks in certain spots that they're going to be substantial,
Yeah,
and impactful, and that's what that feels like to me right now, which makes me excited to play. So
definitely. Couldn't agree more.
yeah, that kind of covers our I think we're going to call it there for this episode. We've got more to cover with Universal's Grand Alliance cards, the new war bands. We have some ideas how we might go about that, and we'll be coming back at you pretty quick with some of those. Phil, did you have any further thoughts on the arrival of Harrowdeep?
I'm just excited to play. Been waiting, sort of been in a holding pattern, and now, especially now that there's like changes to deck construction and stuff, I'm really excited to jump back in.
Yeah, right. Deck building is it's going to be interesting. I really liked, as other people can have done at this point, is perusing some of the cards, and you see a Grand Alliance card, and we'll talk about this more. But you see, and you're like, okay, like it almost hones your thinking a little bit. Like, there's only so many warbands that can actually use this one, so let me think about like where that slots into each of these warbands. So it's kind of a fun way to think about it. So,
Definitely.
um, but that's it. We're going to be coming back at you soon with more Harrowdeep content, uh, talking about some of the warbands and universals and what that means for what we've got. And we'll be coming at you with some game experience as well the next time around. So um, you can get in touch with us with your requests for what you want to see, what you thought we got wrong or right. You can get us at WTHcast on Twitter, whatthehexcast@gmail.com. You can check out all the content from the Mortal Realms Network at themortalrealms.com. And I should say, there's a new show out. There's a brand new show
Ooh, yeah.
to our family. We have Path to Story, and that is a podcast that is covering narrative gaming, specifically using the Path to Glory system that is with AOS 3.0. They're building their own narrative campaign, running through it, giving you that kind of narrative goodness. Paul, one of the hosts, has described it as kind of an amalgamation of a lot of the things that we already have going on. Sort of some of the tactical mindset of what the hex, some of the narrative mindset of the story phase, and some of that skirmish style of Dogs of Warcry. I think is how he was presenting it. So. You can listen to the three of them over, and they have released a episode 0 and an episode 1 by the time you'll hear this. So check it out if you're interested. That about covers it. Your recommended listening for today's episode is The Deep by Clipping. And that is a one-off, but you can get that, and it's pretty rad. Some Afrofuturism crazy story, but worth scoping out. For What the Hex, I've been Davey.
This is Phil.
All right,
No,
we're going now. So that's a moment for after. If I had been recording, you would have the moment where I realized we weren't recording. So that's a first for us, I think.
that is a
Half hour.
first.
So
That has not happened, but that's all
yeah.
right. We're not that far in.
All right.